Your time and expertise are valuable, making focus one of the most important resources to have at work. These days, professionals spend nearly half the work week on written communication, and it can be difficult to stay on task with all the emails and documents you have to get through. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and quickly get through your work with relevant real-time suggestions wherever you write. It works across 500,000 apps and websites, so it can help with everything, from brainstorming presentation ideas to sounding more confident and persuasive in emails and reports. For 15 years, Grammarly has offered best-in-class communication support and enterprise-grade security on a business model that doesn't sell your data. 93% of professionals report that Grammarly helps them get more work done. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast.
Taxes was feeling so stuck. Sitting in traffic, squeezing into a parking spot, all to squeeze in getting tax help during your lunch break. Now Taxes is a TurboTax expert who does your taxes for you, while you go about your day getting real-time notifications about their progress and the most money back guaranteed. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. Joining me this week in another off-season show is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And, you know, we got another off-season show, Seth. It's episode 633. We're going to talk about the wild card weekend and the Cardinals' involvement with that, although not, in the game. We're going to give defensive grades, and we're going to just yap it up about the coaching stuff that's going on, Seth. This is we haven't exactly mapped out our off-season shows yet because there's playoffs and things like that, but we will definitely do that. Seth, how did you like the weekend of the wild card round?
It was interesting. I think that's the first way to look at it. You and I, were chatting most of the weekend, and we looked at these games, and it starts, we can start with game one. I think you and I are both surprised about how bad Justin Herbert played.
Oh my gosh! I mean, it was it ended up being a classic. The Chargers being the Chargers in the playoffs. Even Jim Harbaugh couldn't overcome that.
Right, and I even texted you on that touchdown pass. They're down 23-6, and they have the touchdown pass to Ladd McConkey, and I texted you and I said, was that even a good throw by Herbert, or was that just that was a lucky throw? Yeah, by Ladd McConkey. It's just wild to see, and for a team that's supposed to be built on being tough and running the ball, and they have a combined 50 yards rushing as a team, and I get it's his first year, so I don't want to go overboard with this, but is it not wild, Jess, that something that you and I have talked about for ages, and the Chargers have done it? I mean, even with Brandon Staley, they've done it. I mean, the Chargers build through the trenches. They have good players at a lot of different spots, and they're just, when push comes to shove, and like you said, maybe it's just the Chargers, right? It's the Cardinals, it's the Browns, those teams, but I mean, Jess, this was supposed to be a decent team, and they give up, 168 yards rushing to the Houston Tech. 160. I mean, they're supposed to be tough, Jess. Like, that's the Jim Harbaugh way.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're the tough, and they just get blown out. And so, it goes back to how do you build? We this podcast, we love Joe Alt. And Joe Alt has been fantastic in LA. Nothing can be said different. If you put Joe Alt in Marvin Harrison Jr.'s place, if you just change, that pick, and you say Joe Alt, and like, do the Cardinals win more games? I mean,
I don't think so, because they got pretty good right tackle play for most of the season, and then they would have been down a pass catch, 8 touchdowns from their rookie.
And so it's just like it's just such a cluster every single day to look at these games and look at how this all comes together, and you look at it and you go, I just don't know, man. And
then you look at the other side, Will Anderson. When the Cardinals could have had Will Anderson, instead they got Paris. Not saying Paris is a bad pick, but I'm like, Paris is going to have to be really good if Will Anderson keeps doing what he's doing for that to make sense. Because, and I guess ultimately it comes down to the combination of Paris plus Darius Robinson.
Right. And that's the whole thing, Jess, is it comes down to these situations and how teams or how players fit. And you look at it. Here's a question for you, Jess. And maybe the answer is yes, but just from a statistical standpoint, obviously, could the Cardinals withstand not having Marvin Harrison Jr. in their roster or in their lineup in a playoff game? Because while there are some slight differences, that was essentially what they lost with Tank Dell, right? Like,
yeah,
Tank Dell goes down. Nico Collins is the clear wide receiver 1. Let's just say Trey McBride's target 1. You lose Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, do the Cardinals win a game? Like, are you confident going in? And then not just that, Jess, but think about this. They score 32 points. And I know some of them were defensive scores. I know Justin Herbert was atrocious in this game.
And we got to talk about that too, because, for as much they talk about Justin Herbert, like Kyler Murray being like, Justin Herbert's been to the playoffs twice, and they had a tremendous choke and then 4 interceptions.
Yeah. And that's, I was talking to somebody about that today, and, I've said this a dozen times, do whatever you want with Kyler. If you're on the move on from Kyler bandwagon, move on from Kyler. If you're on the, Kyler's not the problem bandwagon. But here's what my question is. And we saw it last night. We're recording on a Tuesday, and then we saw it Saturday. The question becomes, is your team good enough to overcome a bad game from your quarterback? Because I can tell you who was. The Houston Texans.
Yeah.
I mean, CJ Stroud was just okay.
Well, he hit the first half, not good. Second half, he turned around, but
and so,
we saw that, like, we were watching that first half, and we're like, you throw an interception. Wait, are either of these quarterbacks good? Because guess what? CJ Stroud looked like a completely different player this year compared to his rookie season.
He did. And you look at the Texans. Just because you address the offensive line all the time doesn't mean you have a good offensive line, right? They went from having Laramie Tunsil, who's I think he was an all-pro 2 years ago, to now you've got, he's still on the team, but now he's he hasn't been playing well, and then you add this guy in the first round, this guy in the first round. I mean, they have 2 additional first round picks on their offensive line, and the consensus is that they're not doing enough to help CJ Stroud, right? I mean, that's the hard part, right? You got these guys, and you've got guys that are supposed to be the guy. They're supposed to, you're supposed to pick a Titus Howard, right? And he's supposed to be the guy, and he started 16 games this year. You pick Titus Howard in the first round, you feel like, okay, I got this guy. You pick, you pick Kenyon Green in the first round, and you're like, oh, all right, we got a starter at guard forever. I mean, and not just first round. I mean, he was Kenyon Green was a top 15 pick. They picked Juice Scruggs at the end of the second round last year. He did start 13 games, and I think he was okay, but again, it doesn't mean anything where you draft somebody, because the hope is that they're good, but the reality is that a lot of these guys struggle and are unable. I mean, Blake Fisher was another guy you and I talked about. I liked him a lot. I thought I had a third round grade on him. He went in the second round to the Texans and started 5 games this year for them. And you look at him and you're like, I don't know if he's any good. and so like, that's the real hard part, Jess, is that is the quarterback position's so reliant on everybody else, and everybody, you and we're going to hit this probably 900 times this season or this offseason, but everybody wants the elevator, right? Everybody wants the guy that elevates everybody over. And everybody was like, CJ Stroud's that guy. Look at CJ Stroud. And then this year they're like, is CJ Stroud good? And then it's like, well, you got to get him, you got to get him this and this. And it's like, so he's not an elevator. So, which is fine. There's 3 in the NFL. We've gone over it. There's 3. And I'm not going to hear the Joe Burrow arguments. If Joe Burrow was an elevator of talent, they'd be in the playoffs more than 2 out of the 5 times he's, started seasons. Like, it is what it is. But, you look at it right now and you say, all right, well, if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, if you don't have Josh Allen, if you don't have Lamar Jackson, what do you have? And we saw the Chargers, they don't have the talent. They just flat out don't have the talent.
They had Ladd McConkey. He was literally the only one who did anything offensively.
Right. And their defense wasn't bad. I mean, for most of the game, their defense wasn't bad outside of the run defense. And again, that was more of a second half thing, right? I mean, Joe Mixon got loose in the second half. They caused 3 turnovers. Like, it's wild that they lost that game by 20. That's how bad Justin Herbert played.
Yeah. Well, and a little bit of bad beat because it finished with the total. What was it? 42.5, I think, was the total for that game.
Yeah.
and it hits the over. Why? Because of a returned blocked extra point.
I know. and then you have that, right? And then you have the interesting one, and interesting in the sense of, what are the Pittsburgh Steelers other than very average all the time?
Yeah, they're pretty all right. And I'll say this, like I said it earlier. Now, Russell Wilson played the quarterback position much better than Justin Fields did. But you know what the Pittsburgh Steelers were for much of the season? They were the same team that they were with Kenny Pickett, because about half the season they were defensive field goals. But right. I thought for sure that this game was going to be more competitive than it was, but
I've just unfortunately watched a little too much Steelers. And so they're just so bad, man. They're just so bad. And to watch them come
their
out.
Their defense kind of fell apart in the last half of the season, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. And that's why I knew they were going to struggle. And I know anybody that tells you is lying. Now, we both like the Derrick Henry numbers, but we were not like, hey, take him over 175 yards rush. No. Okay. Not at all. But we did like the matchup in a sense. But, the game itself came out, and it was a tough watch. I mean, there's no flow for Pittsburgh. TJ Watt has fallen off a cliff all of a sudden. I think he's doing too much Peloton workouts against JJ or something. I don't know. But, and again, so you go back to it, and it's like, remember, those were so going back to your question, you had Justin Herbert, who was definitely better than Kyler, and CJ Stroud, who's definitely better than Kyler, and neither of them played very well. CJ Stroud played good enough to not cause his team to lose, where Justin Herbert inhibited his team from winning completely.
He had a Carson Palmer, Jake Delhomme type game. It was one of those games.
Russell Wilson statistically, 20 of 29, 270, 2 touchdowns, but those were all kind of
here's the fact of the matter is that what happened is what we've seen with the Cardinals before is they had they went 6 plays and punted 3 and out, and by then they were down 14-0.
Right.
They were down 21-0 at the half, and then it was over because they gave up 3 touchdowns in Baltimore's first 4 possessions, and
it was just over.
And Pittsburgh didn't score a point in the first half. They had 4 punts and 4 possessions. They played before in the first half. They had 18 plays. Baltimore had a 13-play drive.
Right. Where they ran the ball
on their first
every time.
possession.
Where they ran the ball every time, too. Don't forget.
And so, So his number, those were second half. Like we've seen lots of quarterbacks do that. So
right.
By then the game was decided, and so they have to throw the ball all the time. And in Baltimore, you go back into a conservative defense, and you're okay, dink dunk, we'll let you dink and dunk, that's fine. Like you're gonna have to have 98 yard drives. You're gonna have to have 70-yard drives. So you have to have these long drives to do it. They pulled within. They scored a touchdown. They scored touchdowns on the first 2 possessions in the second half, but those are their only 2 possessions of the third quarter. So, they needed stuff to happen. I watched the game. It was just so boring. It was just such a boring game.
It really was. So you have that, and then you have.
Oh my gosh!
You have the Denver Buffalo, and you want to talk about momentum, man, right? And again, Buffalo wins that game. Probably 99 times out of 100, but I'll say but.
I thought it would be competitive. I thought it would be a competitive game.
How different would the game have been if they make that field goal right before half, right? Like it's a genuine question. Like Lutz makes that field goal, it's tied 10-10. You're feeling good. You feel like you can come out, try to run the ball. Instead, you come out and just, get shellacked in the second half, lose 31-7. It's not even close.
The Denver offense, it was they went 3 and out twice to come after when they came out in the second half, and that was after they're down by 3. It's 13-7. They go 3 and out. They give up a touchdown. They go 3 and out. It don't matter what happened after that. At that point, the game was over, and that was rough. I just thought it was disappointing, and this happens every year. Like the wild card round, sometimes you get good games, and sometimes you get some really bad games, and this was one of those games. And the Denver defense, they did not come to play. Vance Joseph looked very frustrated.
Yeah, and that's something that we'll mention is after this, but some of the hot guys are not as hot after this weekend. Green Bay, Philadelphia, but go back to Bo Nix again. He made one throw all game. I mean, after that, and I know there were some drops, some frustrating drops, but you really, again,
he had 12 completions for 101 yards after.
Yeah,
outside of the touchdown pass.
Yeah, the 45-yard touchdown or whatever it was, and again, that's why you always are like, look, the team that needs to be emulated across the NFL, but especially in Arizona, something that I think they can emulate. They've got guys in the building that have been there. The Philadelphia Eagles beat the Green Bay Packers, 22-10, and it really was never close. I mean,
no,
it was 16 16-6 at one point, or 16-3 at one point, and then and then Philly scored again, and that was kind of the end of things. Or sorry, it was 10-3 at one point, and then Philly went down and scored right after that, and then it's just one of those games where you could again, Jordan Love is miles better than Kyler. That's there's just no mistaking it, right? Like, that's what we've been told. There's no question about it. And he was worth that astronomical extension that he just
3 picks.
And he 20 for 30 for 212 yards and 3 interceptions, and they're locked into him forever, at least the next 4 years. So that's the thing, man. Like, these 4 years, 220 million, I couldn't remember what it was. They basically they can basically get out of it in 27 with a $51 million dead cap hit. So next year and the year after, 25 and 26, he's got to be the quarterback. Remember, because that hasn't even kicked in yet. Like that.
Yeah. Well, and what an addition to Philadelphia. Well, the way defensively that they were able to just let guys go. Hassan Reddick gone, no big deal. Nolan Smith came on and had a fantastic season. Their defensive line, Jalen Carter, an absolute stud this year in year 2. And then they add Saquon, which gives them, they go from having a good run scheme and Jalen Hurts doing pretty good in the pass game. They've really got, but you add Saquon to the mix, and it just changed things a lot. Like you look at kind of what Baltimore did with Derrick Henry. Saquon did it, I think, but to a higher level, because now they have an elite back putting up monster numbers, which takes the pressure immensely off of Jalen Hurts. And remember Nick Sirianni, with how he was garbage. He's apparently a good coach again. He's just, he's a douchebag, but he matches Philadelphia. He does. Right. He matches Philadelphia.
And then we have the most competitive, I won't say the best game, but the most competitive game of the weekend, Washington, Tampa Bay. There was a lot of bad football in this one too.
There was. That was my favorite matchup because I
thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a great game, man. I really did. And you look at this,
holy cow! Zane Gonzalez he almost choked.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
And you look at the statistical numbers of it, right? Like, you look at the statistics of it, and you go. I mean, Baker was fine. 15 of 18, 185 yards, 2 touchdowns. But
the one fumble.
The fumble was massive.
And then the one play where the center didn't snap the ball and nobody else knew it was.
Yeah, I mean, they only had 284 total yards of offense. They had the one turnover. 7 penalties. They were just, they just continued to shoot themselves in the foot. Their passing offense was fine. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't stop the passing game of Washington, and they just struggled overall, and it was another game where you look at it and it comes down to mistakes, and that mistake, that fumble by Baker was the difference in this game.
It really was.
And then Jaden Daniels made some superhuman plays. And so that'll be interesting to watch, because I think everybody's in love with Baker, but also is ready to be done with Todd Bowles, which is an interesting thing to me. But some of the calls that Cliff made, man, I tell you what, those like even the that third down play, that was a terrible play call that Jaden just made a play, right? And so and then the last game last night in Arizona,
the Rams are a problem.
The Minnesota Vikings come out and just get they don't look like they belong.
This is what the Vikings do in the playoff. This time it wasn't some sort of heartbreak, but like two people who figured to cash in this offseason, Brian Flores and Sam Darnold. Can any team look at what Sam Darnold did? Like, they can look, and you can look at the season, you're like, he was good. But who can trust Sam Darnold this offseason after the last two games?
You know what I've been hearing quite a bit is that it'll be LA, or not LA, sorry, Las Vegas. I forget where the Raiders are all.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it. That is, I honestly, Darnold, this is you have to cash it. You have to cash in. You need to go get that contract, because there was no situation in the NFL where you're going to be able to do this again. Get that contract. The contract doesn't matter what team it is, what situation it is. You're not going to get that much money ever again. So go get it, and don't feel bad. And then the Raiders sign you. If the Browns sign you, it's just not going to go well. You're going to play football, you're going to work hard, and you're not going to be great, but you will have cashed in on a fantastic season. But for me, I see this game like the Rams are a problem. The Rams are a problem. Look at their defense. Their last 5 out of the last 6 games. 4 out of the last 5 games. They allowed under 10 points, and the game where they lost to Seattle in week 18, they rested all their guys, and so that defense is a problem. They're young and they're so good. Braden Fisk, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, and really
the only quarterback to do anything against them in the last 5 games was Kyler.
Kyler.
And so, but we're not going to talk about that. So, yeah. So it's just it is an interesting weekend, because it's really, and I think, and I don't want to take credit for this. If somebody else said this, I'm copying them. I just don't remember who it was. Basically said, great QB play is in the AFC, great teams are in the NFC. And I thought that was astute. Like, and that's not to take anything away from Baltimore or Kansas City and stuff like that, but they have they're
quarterback heavy. They're quarterback heavy.
Right. They have the alphas at quarterback, but the teams in the NFCs just seem so much more complete. And so we'll see how that plays out, because typically it's the quarterbacks that dictate things.
And it was like, that's the one game I thought the Chargers would win. I wanted Tampa to win, and it was just the margin of victory that I didn't get right. It was the spread stuff that I didn't get right. But the LA, I'm like, LA's going to, because I look at seasons aside, you look at that playoff matchup, and for me in the playoffs, you look at the quarterback, you look at the defense, you look at the coach, right? And Matthew Stafford or Sam Darnold, who do you trust in the playoffs? Absolutely Matthew Stafford. Defenses, you'd think like you'd look at them. Maybe you gave Minnesota the edge, but look at the way the defense played over the last 5 games of the season compared to how the Rams played the last 5 games of the season, and they were better. And then you go to coach. Yeah, Kevin McConnell's good, but he's now 0-2 in the postseason.
Right.
Sean McVay's won a Super Bowl, been to 2 of them, and is now 12-7 in the postseason. And so, like, if there's a sneak team in the NFC who could make a run to the Super, it's this Rams team. This Rams team could sneak their way into the Super Bowl.
Right. And that's what's interesting, because we're going to talk about it in a second, is like everybody loved a lot of these guys, whether it was the coaches or the quarterbacks, and then coming out of this, you're like, oh, so you're just a regular season team. And here's the thing. This is what I'll say. And I've said this a couple of times. If the Cardinals aren't playing in the postseason next year, then I think you have to move on. And I'm okay with that. And I'm good with that. However, the goal wasn't to be a flashy regular season team that gets bounced in the playoffs. The goal of this entire thing was to build something that can maintain and last and be sustainable, a la the Rams, a la what we're seeing in Philly, a la what we're seeing in Detroit. That's what it is, in San Francisco, right? And that's what it should be. We know, and you and I have said this, we know that Kyler is not the quarterback that's going to be Lamar or Josh or Patrick, where you're just guaranteed to be in the playoffs and have a chance every week in the playoffs. That's okay, because there's 3 of those guys and there's 32 teams. So there's 29 teams that have to figure out a different way to win.
Yeah, and Kyler's a guy, I will say this, Kyler's a guy that can give you that. He can give you that. But he hasn't been able to do it on a consistent level. Like, his ability is off the charts. And so you're going to see Lamar-like play, but he's also, he has that floor where he's just being smartish. And then, but he doesn't elevate everyone all the time. Right. It has to, he's not so much an elevator, but he's a playmaker. So he can put the team on his shoulder, but he doesn't make all the guys around him better.
Yeah, and so that's what it comes down to. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah, I mean, you come out of this weekend and you look at it and you say, look, the reality is you've got to build a better team, or you've got to find one of the unicorns at quarterback. I know it's easier, and that's finding a unicorn, because
and that's not that easy.
Right, because then you don't have to work and you don't have to wait and you don't have to build. But the reality is, if you build a team like the Rams have done, like the Eagles have done, then you can compete and you don't have to worry about it. But that's what it takes.
Coming up next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move and actually talk about the Cardinals. Last show, we talked about the offensive positions, gave them grades. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball and special teams. That's coming up next on the Rise of Seaward. Back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Now going back to the Cardinals, off-season topics. We graded the offensive positions by group. Let's do that on the defensive side of the ball. Let's start with the defensive line. A group that started with Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols and Roy Lopez, and ended the year and had the hope of a Darius Robinson, and you had LJ Collier come on fairly strong towards the second half of the season. Roy Lopez was solid. Darius Robinson played a little bit in the second half. And Dante Stills did well, but you didn't get a lot. But I will say this defensive line play was so much better than last year. I don't think it was good, but I don't think the defensive line played terribly, especially since that's where, week after week, they were getting production from somebody. Naquan Jones made some plays. Ben Stilley, when he played, made plays. And so they had like guys that would help. And I would give this group this year a C-. They weren't bad. They weren't good, but they weren't quite average.
Yeah. The hard part with this C- is that so I would agree with you. I would potentially give them a C. But I agree with you. And the reason why is this. You give them a C- based on you spent a lot in that room.
Yes.
And you didn't get and this is nothing against Darius, but your return on your expenses was 0. Darius didn't do anything this year. That's fine. but the return was literally nothing. Bilal Nichols, Justin Jones, Darius Robinson, they combined, Jess, for less than 500 snaps.
Woo!
That's unacceptable. So for that reason, what you got out of Angelo Blackson,
A game of him and then he gets hurt.
Yeah, Kyrus Tonga, these guys that played well, you give them a C-, because you probably give that group of overachieving rotational guys, you probably give that group a C.
Yeah.
But the reality is this was a disappointment based on what you spent the money on.
Yeah. So yeah, so there was better, and we'll talk about guys to come back, but and it's crazy, and it's so Cardinals. Defensive linemen who they signed to lucrative contracts partially because of their durability, and they immediately get hurt. That was totally Jordan Phillips. It's Justin Jones and both of those I think had played in every single game for the last 2-3 seasons. It was something stupid, and now they season injuries. Let's go to the edge. And interesting, it's really hard to grade this group because if you talk pass rushing production, you're highly disappointed, but it wasn't bad play. You lose B.J. Ojulari in training camp. You lose Dennis Gardeck early in the season. You get Zaven Collins. You got Jesse Luketa stepping up, playing well in the second half of the season before he gets hurt. Xavier Thomas flashed for a couple of games as a rookie. Julian Okwara and Victor Dimukeje had moments, but not really. And then he had Baron Browning with some promise. I'd say this group, which was a failure last year, I'd give them kind of the same grade as about a C- because they did some good. Like there were some good things that they did. It just wasn't rushing the passer. It was all the other stuff, which makes it a very unimpressive group because if your edge rushers don't sack the quarterback, no one looks at your defense and thinks you're good. But they did good things because Jesse Luketa, Victor Dimukeje, Zaven Collins did play really well against the run. The guys that they have when they drop them in the coverage, they do really well in coverage as well. It's an interesting group. Like Zaven, for example, Zaven is, the coaches love him. He's a guy that as an edge defender, he does everything well except rush the passer. He's just not that good at that.
Yeah, and that's okay. And I would agree with you. I mean, the problem being, Zaven's your leading sacker type of guy. That means you have, and I would give it a D, but again, it's hard because the guys that you had in position to be the guy, the high level guys, B.J. Ojulari, got hurt. And like you said, the Zaven's not a lead pass rusher, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't need that, but
as long as you don't try to pay him like one,
right?
You can use him. That's fine.
I think if you get him, and obviously they already have, but like if he's a guy that's like 10 million a year, right? 10, 12 million. You're fine with that. Like, and so that's why I would give it a D as opposed to a C-. But I mean, we're splitting hairs because again,
close.
You're talking about a bunch of guys that shouldn't be rushing the passer that are, and that's what makes it difficult in this group.
Off the ball, you got the group of Kaiser White, Mac Wilson, a little bit of Chris Barnes, a little bit of Owen Papo, and we're not going to worry about the guys that end up playing special teams and whatnot. How do you rate this position group?
It's interesting because I thought Kaiser was such an anomaly last year and so good. And then this year he was very good as a run stopper, but he really struggled in coverage this year. I do wonder if there was something going on physically because he just didn't look as crisp, right? Yeah. But also I've been talking to my buddy. I think I talked about this last week even. I've been talking to my buddy Kyle Posey about this with Fred Warner, and like these guys are so lean and so athletic, and like I just don't know if their bodies can hold up for 8 seasons.
So you remember Deion Buchanan,
right?
His body just he went from being such a playmaker to so very below average.
Right, and you look at the last 4 seasons for Kaiser, 700 plus snaps in every season. He's 6'2", 234. He probably plays in the 220s more likely. It's just that's what I'll say. I think he's a great leader. I think all of that is excellent. I just think he struggled this year in coverage, and he just didn't look like he was moving as well. Mac Wilson, I really enjoyed the Mac Wilson experience. I think he's a guy that you love on this team. I love what he brings from a physicality and motor standpoint. I think he's a great fit. Chris Barnes is a nice rotational guy. There's nothing wrong with him being in that role.
No, it's perfect. How do you what grade do you give this group overall?
I give them a C. I thought they were better against the run than I expected, worse against the pass than I expected. So
yeah, that's about right. I had them kind of C plus-ish. That again, that's real minor, but it wasn't bad play. And I think when we overall look at the defense, a defense we expected to be terrible was pretty ultimately at the end of the year pretty average, and they didn't get spectacular play. And
by the way, we mean that in a good way.
Right. But we thought the offense would have to be scoring 30 points a game because the defense would be giving up 30 points a game.
Right.
And it was better. Cornerbacks were for me kind of it was a little more struggle over, but they were not great. They weren't bad. That group was solidly, for me, just above average. I give the cornerback group a very consistent B- overall. Not a ton of plays. Sean Murphy-Bunting looked terrible early, played really well late in the season. Starr was consistent. Garrett Williams, good. And Max showed some promise. Like he looked like a rookie, but he's physical. And I'm guessing they're going to. Well, that was when we get to the offseason type breakdowns. Is their cornerback room is in a pretty good place as it is right now.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. You look at it, and you go, this was a C group, and then you go, wait, they have one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL. They were right around league average in yards allowed. They don't get interceptions, which is tough. They only allowed 20 passing touchdowns all season. Like, okay, let's move that up. Let's go C plus B minus, right? Like that's the thing is they allow yardage. They allow a lot of completions. They aren't forcing a lot of turnovers. But all of that, I'm going to give them a small pass on because they don't have any help up front. So that's how I would grade them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Safety, where you think the position as a whole played well to be an A, but I give the position a solid B, which is honestly, it should be. That's a little bit disappointing, isn't it? Because you wanted more from Jalen. Because you get a play from Buddha, especially with the work that he does at or around the line of scrimmage. You needed more in terms of playmaking, in terms of pass breakups and interceptions, and you didn't get that from Jalen this year. So, I think I give it a B, but it is on the disappointing side.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think, and I've said this all along, I think if your best defensive players are your safeties, you probably have a bad defense.
Yeah.
And I love Buddha. I love everything he does. That's not to say that you can't have good defense, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, but those guys were like luxuries on top of everything else they had in front of them.
Yes.
Having Buddha and I don't know if he's in that tier, but he's probably in, if they're the S tier or whatever the kids call it, he's probably right in that A, B tier, right below them, right? The problem is he's played maybe one season with any talent around him.
Oh, I know.
And he's choosing to stay, but let's be honest, he's choosing to stay because the Cardinals are one of the franchises that, right or wrong,
they'll pay legacy players.
Yeah, and safeties at that. So
yes. Special teams. Now that as a whole, they got some good stuff. Like they weathered Blake Gillikin's injury, Matt Prater's injury. Chad Ryland came and kicked really well, except for a couple of kicks. They had decent punt returns from Greg Dortch. The kick return game, you always had a threat with DJ Dallas. He even got some All-Pro votes, probably for that one kickoff return for a touchdown he had to open the season. I think special teams overall were. I don't. Would it be fair to give an A to any part of this team? It's a solid B plus. They did really well. I think they did really well. I don't think they were elite, but I thought that was a really good, especially when you consider the injuries they sustained, and they still played at a high level.
Yeah, and I thought, I think Ryland really only hurt them in one game, right? Like you said, the punting
make that up by making game-winning kicks. So
right, exactly. And so, yeah, I think a B plus is a really good way to look at this.
And so, if you look across position, we're giving the defensive positions mostly C's around there, and they're a pretty average. C defense, and they're a pretty C defense,
right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And you look at it and you go, there's growth potential. And that's what you kind of look at.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on. Let's do a little chat about the coaching cycle and what's going on. That's coming next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, Best Ever Cardinals Talk on the Web. Oh, it's at least we don't have to cover this about our teams. Is that one, they have their staff intact. Nobody seems to be at risk of leaving. Drew Petzing had an interview with the Chicago Bears, but I don't think anyone believes that he is in a position that he's going to be that next guy to make the job, especially with the other candidates out there. But my goodness, now those of you who have paid attention to, as Cardinals fans, to the Steve Wilkes lawsuit, that was not a good look this offseason when you see two black one-and-done coaches in Gerard Mayo and Antonio Pierce. Gerard Mayo getting the absolute shaft job by New England. And Robert Kraft really framed it kind of the way that Michael Bidwill did when Steve Wilkes was fired. Respected the hell out of it, worked really hard. And it just didn't work out. It's really hard for me to think that Mayo shouldn't have gotten another year. I know as a team you can sure do whatever you want. It's just going to look really bad when you give a rookie head coach an absolute garbage roster and then fire him after 1 year when that garbage roster doesn't do anything. Come on.
Well, and the similarities with the Cardinals don't end there, right? Like you look at their season, they were pretty much overmatched in every situation. They finished 4-13, but then you look at it, they had these wins, right? And we'll throw out the Buffalo game, right? Like whatever, but they beat the Bengals in week 1, right?
Yes, that's right. We remember that. We're like, what in the world?
Yeah, and so you look at it. It was interesting. I mean, I get it. 30th in scoring offense, 22nd in scoring defense. They don't do anything particularly well. It's tough, but I thought he got the shaft. It's a joke. And then they've already moved on to Mike Vrabel, which just tells us that they wanted Mike Vrabel last year and just for some reason couldn't get him. I don't know what the rules are. I don't know what any of that means, but they wanted Mike Vrabel last year. It seems fairly obvious at this point.
Well, yeah, the second his contract was up with Cleveland as a consultant, they're like, oh, Mayo, you're done. Like almost immediately. Vrabel is the coach, and which was 100% predictable. Who do you think is going to end up? And well, now Dallas is looking for a head coach because they let Mike McCarthy go.
It's classic Jerry Jones always to be late into the situation.
Oh
too,
my
right?
gosh! Well, and on top of that, which team requested an interview, and they're like, nah, and then they decided to not sign him again. Like, come on! If you were going to just move on, why didn't you let him interview? That was dumb. But we've got, this is so fun. The Jets need a coach. The Bears need a coach. The Raiders need a coach. Who do you think ends in the different spots? Do you think that Ben Johnson is going to get Brian Flores? Do you think these guys are going to get their jobs this time around? Are they going to finally land it?
Yeah, it sounds like Flores will get a job this time. I think he ends up in either New York with the Jets or Chicago with the Bears. They both teams
Flores and Caleb Williams.
Teams are looking for culture, right? And that's the big one. Ben Johnson, for whatever reason, it seems like he's going to end up in Vegas, and I don't understand that from his perspective. But good for him.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, what do you think? Brian Flores and Caleb Williams, do you think that can work?
I don't. Just especially with how he was with Tua, but guys change, and maybe it's for the better that he got this opportunity. I really do think he ends up with the Jets. I think that's
crazy that the Jets, the way they go, that's like exactly. They go Todd Bowles, they go Robert Saleh, they go Brian Flores. They're the same guy.
Right. Yeah. So we'll see how it works out for him this time, right?
And 100% Robert Saleh is going to go back to the 49ers, isn't he?
It sounds like it. I mean, I think he could have some other options. It does sound like Dennis Allen's a potential guy in San Francisco as well.
That's true. Interesting. But yeah, and this is the interesting, and just go to know, guys, as you're listening to this, Cardinals, as much as you like to say, oh, they've got up and coming head coach candidates. Drew Petzing got an interview. Sure thing, whatever. It felt like just a long shot. Just let's bring him in. And Nick Rallis still not getting any play. The Cardinals coaches, they're not there yet. They're not there yet. And so it looks like the Cardinals are going to have unless. Do you think Cliff lands somewhere?
No, I don't. Not this year. I think they're going to want to see him next year, and then a team that's going to end up with the top quarterback selection is going to make that kind of move with him.
Yeah, that would make sense. But yeah, I want to see him. I want to see Cliff in his next head coaching sting. How things go. How differently he does things, especially early on. But
right, exactly.
It looks like we're going to see year 3 with virtually the same staff. As much as people would like to see Drew Petzing replaced, it's clear. Like Jonathan Gannon is not replacing him. They're not replacing. It doesn't sound like they're going to replace Drew Terrell. Otherwise, probably. I mean, coaches' contracts are coming up due soon, so we'll have to wait and see. But my guess is that there are not going to be any changes this year with the staff, and people might not want to hear that. But big picture, both the team and the offense and the defense made strides in 2 years. So it would be hard to say, no, we're moving on, because they've made improvement on both sides of the ball. So
yeah, and we'll see.
That's hard to do. So,
right, and we'll see how that continues.
We're going to roll it back. Let's see what the roster looks. And that's the big thing. The offseason, this offseason is about the roster. It's about the roster. Let's see what they do differently. It's about growth within the roster, and what do they do this like? Is this the offseason where Monty adds a little age? Maybe we'll have to wait and see. That's the question that I've got. Exactly. he's like no 130. Everyone's under 30, but now that you're almost there, will you add an old guy?
Right, exactly.
So we'll see that. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Seer podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back later this week to talk more Cardinals offseason and look at the playoffs, the divisional round coming up this weekend. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be red, see red, and of course, Rise up, see red.